Empathy is critical for system design. Not sympathy, not compassion, but empathy. People get those things mixed up all the time. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, not being sympathetic towards them. So before we get round to that, I'm going to describe what I'm doing here because it ties into it. I was listening to somebody who has a YouTube channel. He's an online coach, and his YouTube channel is doing quite well, but he waited for many years to do it, afraid of what his mates would think, basically. And he said that is Mark Waters is the guy. And he said that when he finally did it, the guys that he was scared of judging him the most were his biggest supporters. And with the way I understand about male patterns of behavior, the social sexual hierarchy, it makes perfect sense to me why that would happen, and I think it's universal. The reason is that the guys that whose opinion we care the most about tend to be higher status guys. They tend to be bravos or alphas or maybe high status deltas. And oddly enough, although we care the most, although we fear their judgment the most, they are the most likely to be excited to have someone else in their group trying to better himself. They're not the crabs in the bucket scenario is more from beneath or maybe aside, to either side of you. If you want to think about it in a purely hierarchical terms, I think this is universal. So that's and here's the thing. The SSH, the social sexual hierarchy, one of the most interesting things about it is that higher status men have more empathy than lower status, which again is surprising because we tend to use empathy when what we actually mean is sympathy. So the best way to describe this would be Sun Tzu saying that you need to understand yourself. That makes you more likely to win a battle. Better yet, if you understand yourself and you understand your enemy, makes you that much more likely to win every battle. Or maybe the quote is, if you understand yourself and your enemy, you'll win every battle or whatever. He's describing empathy there. He's describing, the alpha's uncanny ability to predict the other, to put himself into somebody else's shoes and understand them and where they're coming from and what they're likely facing or the challenges they have is basically crucial for strategy, especially when you have, enemies you need to defeat. And this obviously is not just a historical thing. It's in the modern context as well. It's just shifted. It's not, the swords on a battlefield, but it's other forms. And anyway, so this is one of the reasons why. So this kind of empathy without necessarily sympathy is one reason why high status men will love it when they see someone else in their group try to better themselves, and they'll kind of tactically switch on the sympathy, but all along they have the empathy to understand the other person, to put themselves in their shoes. But with that ability but without sympathy, they're more likely to tease or even bully the guy who's weakening the group, right? To kind of either have himself select out or have him, have trigger something in him to rise and do better, because they want the men in their tribe to be better because it helps them. So, if you're king of a bunch of losers, it doesn't mean much, right? But if you're a king of winners, that helps you, right? So the guys at the top are helped by the guys below rising, rising tide lifts all boats, I suppose, although this isn't really relevant to that because we're talking about one boat rising itself, so the analogy doesn't apply. But anyway, so I connected with this fear of worrying what specific men in my life would think about me doing this a lot, because my current employer, who is an alpha male, is the person who I'm most worried about, peeping my stuff and judging it. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, actually, you know what? He probably would be the most supportive, with a slight caveat, because in alpha psychology, they are worried about, they're always thinking about others. They always have to think about others. Maybe that's why they develop this empathic ability to understand them and put themselves in their shoes. And they're always thinking about, both externally, enemies and allies, but also internally their group, and they treat their group quite differently to those outside their group. And they're really keen to see men in their group do really well, but that can shift if that either challenges their spot or it weakens their spot, or if in this case it's a sign that the guy is leaving their group when they don't want them to. And this could probably just be solved by having a conversation with the guy and saying, look, because I am looking to leave, and I am a little worried about what will happen when I do. And so it's one of those difficult conversations that's easy to put off, but it needs to be done. And I should do it sooner rather than later. But basically what I'm trying to do as a part of this, so in leaving, I want to leave with a quote unquote normal job that I can do, but also to be building up an online coaching thing just to see if it will work. Implementing the things that I've learned through being with this company for 8 years now, and specifically just before leaving is like the final opportunity for me to really nail down this system design thing that I've learned so much about, and that I've done kind of slowly in a not very deliberate fashion, kind of here and there kind of fashion throughout my tenure. But oddly enough, the fact that I'm planning on leaving is narrowing my focus and making it like I'm really trying to get this process nailed down, this process of processes, this kind of meta system of, how do you develop systems in a business, in your own personal workflow, bringing others on board? How do you get them to not leave it alone? How do you get them to keep engaging with it and keep improving the system over time, so that either the big boss or the other bosses, yourself, if you have underlings, or your people you report to, how do you get it so that you reduce that chaos? You actually have people follow the systems that you've outlined, or that you've agreed with them would make things more efficient, when the path of least resistance is to slip back into a more ad hoc thing, which only leads to chaos and inefficiencies and stress and all the rest of those things that we want to avoid. So the challenge that I have is, as a result of me leaving and wanting to leave the company in a good spot, in the best possible spot that I can leave it, I want to design this, system of systems before I go, teach it to the other, prove it out first, teach it to the others, and then basically replace my current functions as much as possible. I'm trying to replace myself completely if I can, before I leave, so that my absence is barely felt. Now, obviously, you can't replace yourself completely, because oddly enough, the person who's able to replace themselves in what they're currently doing is one of the most valuable people to keep, because that's a system builder. that's someone who can, that mind and that, you know, familiarity with the process and the experience doing it can then be applied to the next thing to make that efficient, to, you know, take the chaos out of that and to take it off of some grateful person's plate. But you know what I'm saying. In my current functions, I want to replace myself at least, so that although my boss will be disappointed, presumably, that I'm going, it won't be like a bit of a sting like we've had with other senior people who've left. There isn't, you know, a new stage of chaos after they go, as we try to kind of scramble together and, you know, get the function that they were holding up into good functioning in their absence. You know, I want that to be really, really smooth. So okay, so yes, so that deadline that I'm setting myself is forcing me to, you know, get this nailed down. Hopefully by the end I'll have something, you know, if it works, it will be something. If my plan works, as in I do develop a system that I can teach to the other staff that does work and holds up, then that is something that I can offer to others as a coaching system or a course or whatever. So, all right, let me look at my notes here. Yes, so, right. The last thing I thought I'd say, not to just talk about myself, but to very briefly describe where the system is currently at, and something that even if this is all you see, you may be able to take this away and apply it, is that it's surrounded, the core of it is deliverables, not SOPs. So if you've looked at process design things, if you've looked at ways to systemize your business functions and try and get yourself out the middle of things and all the rest of it, they focus a lot on the standard operating procedures, or in Sam Carpenter's book, Work the System, he described it as working procedures. Checklists, instructions, whatever. They are the things which people often focus on, and, you know, they're a fantastic asset. Another guy, Gary Keller, the author of The One Thing, said that he spent $100,000+ on a document which basically encapsulated the entire system of this franchise that he'd built, I think. And it was this massive beast of a document that he hired, you know, at least one lawyer to do, and obviously had other people working on it. And basically he estimated the total cost of building this document as you know, over $100,000, and he said it's the most valuable asset the business has. So this whole system design thing is very, very real, but I would say it is the reason perhaps why people are still trying to figure it out, why it hasn't been kind of nailed down, is that, you know, business is this ever evolving thing, or the competition, the marketplace is always shifting, so there's never just like one system that works. And so it needs to be, so while that document, I'm sure, was obviously, it was hyper valuable, over time it's likely to get less valuable unless there is something that's always updating it. And that can just be pressure from the top to, you know, to just get to just put resources into, you know, developing another edition of a system. That's fine, and there can be, you know, incentives and punishments in place to push people to use the system or to follow the system. But I'm thinking about it in this way where hopefully it can grow more organically and it can be more intrinsically motivating for people. And my current thesis is to focus on what is delivered, the deliverables, and to have any piece of work that's described by an SOP to have at the end of it something which is delivered. And so one example of this is, managing an inbox, something which I hate, by the way. And this was something I really needed to do just for myself, to get something in place which will hold me accountable to sticking to that and doing that thing that sucks so much, but it is so necessary. And basically, I came up with this simple deliverable called a comms update. And so it's for a particular team inbox where I go in, I have a tag structure. I tag things in a particular way. And so that later the other roles within the function would come in and just deal with that one section. They deal with it, they perhaps capture it into a task system, but basically, they process it, and only when it is closed, they archive it. And when the email is archived, it goes out of the inbox, but the label will always be applied to it. It's always categorized. But before all of that, rewinding back, just managing the inbox, the comms update. So the communications steward, if you want to think of like a micro role, that's another thing. But let's focus on the deliverables aspect of it, because that's, I think, more important, even though it's kind of in the middle of the whole structure. Is the comms update is something I gave myself to do after these things are done, which basically just very quickly summarizes, what came into the inbox that day, right? So think about this. Instead of what's happened before, giving somebody an inbox to manage, and then because they don't naturally take to it, some people apparently do. I don't know, I don't understand why, but yeah, fine. But still, it ends up being something that you don't see again, unless they naturally enjoy it, or are, keeping on top of it, just keeping themselves on top of it. And then something comes up which they feel should come to your attention. But otherwise is just hopefully happening out there. You don't know unless you remember to check in and, crack the whip a bit, or, more likely than not, though, they're letting it drift, So it's this thing that creates a lot of manual time monitoring, managing, and just to make sure that it's being done. And however, tying it to a small deliverable, and the deliverable is the thing that you hold the person to, or you hold yourself to, that just immediately opens up visibility on the task, which is such a thing for managing people to just know what they're up to, especially in this more like digital working, remote work environment. But even if you're in an office, you're not hopefully hanging over someone's shoulder looking at what they're doing. And you don't want to, have this software thing that, takes screenshots of their laptop throughout the day to like force them into doing what you hope they're doing by this kind of, big brother's always watching sort of thing. Rather, it's saying, look, this deliverable is, associated with this micro role we're assigning to you, or whatever. Well, this deliverable is assigned to you now, and this is what's expected. And so they are held accountable. They're less likely to procrastinate. They'll get the thing done, even if it's a tiny little update. They post it in a Slack channel or whatever, and you can just see, okay, that's being done. And this can be obviously applied to a huge report as well, not just a little tiny update, but something like a quarterly report. And so sitting underneath these deliverables might be SOPs, which is a whole other thing to get them to go in and keep engaging with. But my current philosophy with this, my thesis, is that keeping the whole thing centered around what is delivered, and if it's a task for which nothing's delivered, nothing tangible is really delivered, you just make something up, is I've found it just with initial testing to be a bit of a game changer. So basically, I'm still working with this. I'm still testing it out and developing it. But if you've watched this long, I encourage you to take that idea for yourself. And as you look at your own systems and you're looking at a task which you keep having to like be on people's backs about to like force them to do it and it's taking up your time, blah, blah, blah. Think about what you can define as a deliverable for that task and explain it to them, get their buy-in, get them like force them if you have to edit the kind of template or the brief, the like standard brief of this little deliverable or this big deliverable, so that they've got their fingerprints on it. And then when you do check-ins with them, the list of deliverables that they've agreed to is the first thing on the screen, right? So this is a way to make it like undeniably clear. And it's not, the reason why this is superior to SOPs is that SOPs don't necessarily have, like, you have to remember to add a purpose to it, you know what I mean? And it's just much less focused, and it's, you know, it's not necessarily, it's not baked into it that it's necessarily something that you'll ever have visibility of. Whereas a deliverable is something that by necessity, you will see it be delivered. Again, even if it's something like a little tiny update that someone puts into an email or something relatively public, I think it should be usually public to the team, but at least to you if you're a manager of somebody doing this thing. And you don't need to be like, oh, we're doing this whole new system now. I've seen this random guy on the internet gave me this idea, and this, well, I don't really have like a full system for you to implement anyway, so you're not going to be able to have any buzzwords to confuse them with anyway. But instead, just focus. Look, I want you to do this, and I expect it every, you know, every morning, every week, every month, every quarter, and I'm going to be checking in with you on this, and just see how that changes things, especially if it's something which you know has been stressing you out because you don't really know whether the person's doing the thing you want them to do. Add a deliverable to that thing, get them to commit to it, be looking at it the first thing every time you meet with them, every time you do a catch up or whatever. And if it doesn't happen, immediately tell them, we agreed that you deliver this by this time, why isn't it done? And you know, so you have to do that at first, but the theory is, I haven't been implementing this properly for long enough to tell you whether this theory really bears out, but the idea is that over time you'll have to do that less and less, because going back to the SSH psychology, delta males in particular love when something is very clear. And if you give them a goal that's kind of vague, and to you it might make sense, but to them they're stressing now about what this really means and what they might get in trouble for doing it wrong or picking the wrong thing to do within it. But if it's something like a clear template or clear set of instructions which they just have to carry out and then you'll be happy, they're way happier with that. They love clarity and they love to be recognized for just doing their job, doing a good job. And so this is a great way, because I'm going to try not to go off on another tangent, but another thing I've noticed, not on a long tangent anyway, but another thing I've noticed with deltas is that they will, is that it can be very frustrating for me anyway, and stressful to harp on them and like get on their case for something which I can tell wasn't actually that clear to them. You know, with some guys, you think maybe they're kind of taking us for a ride here and they're not pulling their weight consciously. But with other guys, you think, I think they're trying. I think they're really trying, but they're just failing to deliver. And then I'm like, what do I actually want them to deliver? And sometimes I find that hard to answer that question. And so I'm like, if I'm finding it hard to answer that question, you better believe that they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, you know? And so this is a way of forcing that clarity as well for their benefit. All right, I could probably keep going, but I'm going to cut it there. I'm my mailing list, if you want to sign up to receive articles, to receive newsletters about this stuff and other related things. James of the Bear on Substack. Go and find that. Sign up if you like. All right, let's end it there. Thanks a lot.